Okay, I wanted to show you something here. I have three parameters for the Nikon D500, the Nikon D810, and the Fuji XT1. I reprofiled these today for my Sekonic light meter using actual test shots. I removed my D750 from my light meter since you only have three profiles that can be programmed in, to prove that I actually took the shots. The table that I do my talking at, which is covered in a background. You can obviously see that. I'm using a color checker passport. We did correct exposure. We took a incident reading, then we took a spot or reflectance reading, and we went three stops over, and then we went three stops under. And so this is the profile for the D810, correct exposure 3 under, 3 over, and then we plugged in our values off of our light meter so we could calibrate the meter. And I used a different lens. I used the 2470 2.8 this time instead of the 50 millimeter, which I had programmed in for the Nikon D810. And also the exact same test with the D500. And I removed the profile from my Nikon D750. So here you see correct exposure, 3 stops under, 3 stops over on the Nikon D500 using the 17 to 55 at f4, and the Fuji XT1. Since the light meter only sees exposure, light white balance is not an issue. Color meter, my Sekonic does not recognize color balance. Only sees exposure. So let's take a look at the graphs and let's see what sort of dynamic range, and also something that other people reported and that I mentioned and that you could actually see is that when it comes to your speculars, i.e. your highlights, the D500, while it is incredible, it is weighted towards the lower end of the dynamic range. In other words, the D500, it gets its fingers burnt more easily than the Nikon D750 does or the Nikon D810 does on your speculars, i.e. your highlights. As you can see here, we have a clipping point of 2.7 EV and a dynamic range on the upper end of 3.3 EV. And this is very conservative values. We could actually set that higher, but to stay within the safe range, we have a total dynamic range of 7.2 stops and a clipping range that I set so that I don't fall within the edge if I have light shift outdoors, not indoors. That's not a concern. Certainly not a concern from studio strobes, since the power output is extremely consistent within a extreme fraction of a watt second. And let's take a look at the Nikon D810, and then we'll compare the two. Okay, let's take the D810 over here and the D500 here. So we have a dynamic range 7.2 stops in D500, and on the Nikon D810, using the 2470 2.8, and we have a 7.7 stops of dynamic range with a clipping point range of 6.7 versus 6.3. Considering this is a pixel pitch of 4.2 micrometers on the Nikon D500, and we have a full frame sensor here. However, splitting the difference on the D810 at 36 megapixel sensor, we have smaller photo size, but still a full frame sensor, full frame pixel pitch and photo size. We have now this is base ISO of 64 on the D810, base ISO of 100 on the Nikon D500. But here you can see we have less than a stop difference. We actually have a half a stop difference of dynamic range between the Nikon D810 and the Nikon D500. Here we have 3.5 stops up on the Nikon D810 and 4.5 down. Since the base ISO is 64, that's certainly understandable on the Nikon D810. So 3.2 up and 4.5 down, and 3.3 up on the D500 and 3.9 stops down. That's from our mid-tone right there. Now that correlates with what others report, that the D500 is ever so slightly picky and it gets its fingers burnt on the speculars at your highlights. So that's something that, well, it's not a concern of the D500. It means the D500 is more picky on getting its little fingers burned on the speculars. Now let's take a look at a totally different camera, just from a matter of perspective. The people that watch my videos are always wanting to compare Nikon and Fuji. Well, what's a dynamic range? Well, here we're using the kit lens, which actually is a really, really good lens. Most kit lenses are crappy. This is profile with the 1855 kit lens. On the Fuji XT1, we have a dynamic range of 6.5 stops. We have 3.2 up and 3.2 down. Now, this is a 16 megapixel sensor, Fuji X-Trans, and we have a 20.8 megapixel sensor, also DX crop, on the Nikon D500. So we have 3.3 up on the D500, 3.2 up on the Fuji XT1, and 3.2 down on the XT1, and 3.9 down, which is, yeah, there we go. 3.9 down on the Nikon D500, which of course, given the fact of how it's been profiled by me and -4 EV on capturing autofocus acquisition and just insane low light. I mean, I'm autofocusing on stuff I can't even see. I've already proved that point. We have a clipping point range of 5.6, so it's a good bit less on the Fuji XT1, as it should be. A clipping point range of 5.6 versus 6.3 on the Nikon D500. So we have a dynamic range of 7.2, 6.5. Let me bring up the Nikon D810 here. You take a peeky see, and this is real world. This is not computer generated. I mean, these are from the actual pictures that I took to profile. I mean, you can see my bloody table right here. Everybody knows that table that's in 1,000 900 videos of mine. So I took the pictures for exposure check. Using my my X-Rite passport there, so we know these are real-world pictures. This is not, speculation based upon mere software. It's like, well, what does the camera really do? There's what something does on paper, and there's what it really cranks out when you slap a lens on it. And these graphs are exactly, my camera and my tripod slapping the lens on there, and averaging the shots of correct exposure, 3-stop over, 3-stop under. So Nikon D810, we have 7.7 stops of dynamic range, and really good, considering DX crop sensor and D500, 7.2 versus 7.7. But you can actually see the curve here, and compare that to the D810 and the Fuji XT1 here, here, and here. Like I said, again, the D500, it gets its fingers burnt a wee bit faster than many other cameras on the speculars or highlights. Okay, you got your speculars, your midtones, your diffuse, and down to your shadows down here. Shadows. Okay, so clipping range 6.3, 7.2. Clipping range is 6.7, 7.7 on the XT1. Clipping point range of 5.6 and 6.5. And I said we got 3.2 up and down on the XT1, 4.5 down, and 3.2 up on the D810, and we have 3.9 down on, and this is, DX pixel pitch. I mean, this is a 4.2 micrometer pixel pitch, Back in the full frame here, 4.5 versus 3.9, and actually I could have brought it a little lower. The down setting is within error of 4 down. So you could say 4 down on the D500 and 4 or 5 down on the D810. That's really, really good. And so there we go. That's the true real world, not, software and hocus pocus. Obviously this is software, but it's taken from real images from the XT1, the D810, and the D500. I took all these shots, as you can see, and that's the profiling for these cameras, and it matches real-world output that you get, and so I thought people would like to see that. These are 3, kind of radically different cameras, but it gives you a perspective where the D500 lies. And so far as its dynamic range and its clipping points, and where things are hot or cold, or said D810, by the way, is not so bueno. We take a look at our upper range dynamic on a D810 versus a D500. We have 3.2 on the upper on the D810. We have 3.3, and 75% of your data on average is up in your highlights. So that means the Nikon D500 is doing muy bueno on the speculars for data retention. than the D810 does, and that is even given the fact that the D500 is more sensitive and on the specular highlights than the D810 is, or the X-T1, or even the D750. Anyway, thanks for watching. And a lot of this is kind of make your eyes roll in the back of your head, the sort of stuff for some people, but other people, want to know that sort of stuff. So, thanks for watching. Catch you later. Bye.